Welcome to the Life Tracks Podcast. I'm your host, Marvin Bryson. For me, podcasting represents a modern take on oral storytelling traditions. Being born in the very last year of the baby boom, I'm closing in on retirement and have grown comfortable in embracing my role of elder in hopes that future generations might benefit from my experiences. An extra added bonus is that part of my history will also be available for my grandchildren should they want to know more about their pop-pop. As a teen, I landed my first paying gig as a musician. The year was 1979, so I have more than 40 years of stories to share in that venue. My music business background came into play because it informed my first motion picture gig as a music supervisor in 2001. The film was Blue Moon, the late great director Xavier Green's Howard University Fine Arts thesis project. Blue Moon aired on Showtime and marked the debut of notable comedic actress Coco Brown. From there, I focused on motion picture editing, completed a great Avid editing program, and moved to Hollywood. Over the past 20 years, I have compiled over 200 credits on roughly 20 television series and films. So without further ado, let's get into track 8, Gayatri. Gayatri is the title of one of my absolute favorite recordings and a manifestation of the popular Gayatri mantra, a hymn from the Vedic text. The mantra facilitates rest and relaxation as the foundation for Gayatri Yoga. I would come to appreciate how John, Jen, and Amy's band, 24 FPS, was all about authentic music and mellow vibes while pulling off a professional execution of that music live. When I reached out to John about a jam session, I had no idea I'd be creating this type of music. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's circle back to Rama's and my ride back from the foothills. As we listened to 24 FPS's CD, I was blown away. All the songs were so much more than your typical 3 chords and a bridge middle-of-the-road pop. I found the compositions to have depth, meaning, and soul, so I knew I'd have to show up at the jam session on my A-game. Over the years, I've been in bands with some stellar players. Marcus was basically a teenage guitar prodigy. He could mimic Funkadelic's Mike Hampton, Eddie Van Halen, or any of the other guitar gods you might choose. Ant's government name is Anthony Wellington. He's recognized as one of the top bassists in the world. And through his bassology program, teaches and mentors both celebrity and non-celebrity bassists worldwide. Coming up playing with those two, I learned not to judge myself against other players, but simply be the best Marvin I could be. Folks often talk about life lessons taught from sports. This lesson from my musical journey informed my philosophy. So I just put in the work and learned the 24 FPS songs as pat as I could before reaching out to John. John and I played email tag for a couple of weeks and then settled on a date for me to come and jam with the trio. The trio rehearsed not too far from my old office in Alexandria, so getting there was quick and easy for me. When I arrived at the jam session, everyone was cordial. We had a beer and got to it. Evan, a drummer, was also there. He played on the CD and was a real pro. His style of playing just a little bit behind the beat is a secret to funky music from my perspective. Evan and I locked in right away, which is a great thing for a drummer and a bass player to do. After rolling through the first song, Knife, I saw smiles on Amy and Jen's faces, so I guess I didn't suck. We jammed a couple of more times, where I learned a couple of more tunes from their set list. At the 3rd or 4th jam session, the trio let me know they had a show scheduled in a couple of weeks. Not really understanding why they were telling me, I asked if I could get some tickets on a guest list. Then Evan and me were basically told, "You're in the band." I know it sounds crazy, but that's the way it happened. Anyway, the weeks passed by quickly and we landed at the Orinoco Park in Old Town Alexandria. The park was blocked off. A flatbed train had been converted to a stage with a complete backline. For you non-musicians out there, a backline usually includes a drum kit and several amplifiers at a minimum. It's a great perk to keep bands from having to transport their gear to a show. More popular acts specify the equipment they want in a contract rider. A rider is the legal document you always hear about where eccentric artists specify M&M colors and other nonsense. Speaking of food, there was also a backstage area that required a pass and was stocked with food and drinks. And then I found out Aaron Neville was also on the bill. That was one hell of a first gig for me and a sign of things to come. What I remember most about that day is how the bass rig shaped my bass's sound, and for the better. The rig consisted of a 15-inch Hartkey woofer in the bottom cabinet, 4 10-inch speakers in the top Hartkey cabinet, and a Gallien-Kruger RB 450-watt head. Hartkey and GK would become my go-to bass rig components for years to come. I spent nearly 3.5 years in the band, and we played in the neighborhood of 200 gigs. I could go on for tracks and tracks about our various gigs and adventures on the road. So, for expediency's sake, I'm going to break down my 24 FPS tenure by my drummer partners in the rhythm section, Evan and Mike. Here's my take on the Evan years. Evan and I bonded rather quickly. I came to find out he was as friendly and helpful as he was talented. He let you know right away that his wife and kids were his primary focus, with drumming coming in a close second. He and I were a little older than John, Amy, and Jen, so we bonded on that note too. That summer was eventful. We played probably 12 or so gigs over the 3 months. And when the fall rolled around, it didn't take long before I realized just how many more pop and rock venues are available than ones that specialize in R&B. Moving forward, we booked a few local gigs, but also played at the 8x10 Club in Baltimore and CBGB's Gallery in New York City. We would later work our way up to playing both venues 3 or 4 times a year. I would also be introduced to the concept of a living room show, where fans of the band literally booked you to play in their living rooms. Living room shows are common in the singer-songwriter realm and are used to build a following and fundraise. The band's manager booked us quite frequently in New York City venues like the Living Room in the Village, Maxwell's in Hoboken, and the Dark Style Lounge up in Midtown. We also played quite a few Life Beat events. Life Beats is a music industry nonprofit founded in 1992 to address the AIDS crisis with a unified voice. The Life Beat events reminded me of my showmobile days with Hot Property, in that we didn't know who we might be sharing a bill with. John drove a pickup, Evan an Odyssey, and I drove a Jeep Cherokee. The band would load up all our gear in the various vehicles for our New York road trips. Then we would jam everything into Evan's Odyssey for the ride into Manhattan from our manager's house in Hoboken. Over the winter, we started composing songs for a full-length CD. The band's songwriting style was essentially informed by John. John was all about things happening organically and in a mellow way, so he would introduce part of a song he was working on casually during rehearsal. Then we other instrumentalists would go on to compose our specific parts. After a few months, we had most of the album worked out and started looking for studios and engineers. We settled on Bias Studios in Springfield, Virginia. Bias boasts an eclectic mix of hit songs, including Niles Lofgren's Breakaway Angel, Mary Chapin Carpenter's Dead Man Walking, and Chuck Brown's breakout hit Bustin' Loose. As far as producers go, the group turned to Heidi Gerber, who had produced the first CD, and we also landed notable producer Doug Derryberry from Bruce Hornsby and the Range. Doug also worked with Ben's 4-5 and Last Train Home, among others. After booking studio time and putting together a budget, we realized we were a little short on cash, so borrowed from the living room shows and put on a fundraiser. Our community fan base support was overwhelming and produced a sellout performance, with us raising enough money to proceed as planned. When we released the new CD, our activity picked up tremendously, causing a fundamental change in the band's lineup.